Well, good morning. Welcome to Compass. Our mission is navigating people to God. My name is Nate, one of the pastors here. We're so glad that you're worshiping with us, whether that's in the room. I want to welcome those of you who are worshiping at home as well. And if you're a guest, hey, we're glad that you're here, and we would love to meet you. We'd love to connect with you. And so right after the service is over, right here, the doors to my right in our Next Steps room, we would love for you to come there. We've got a gift for you. It's our way of saying thanks for joining us. And at any time at home, if you're watching this, you can always text the word Connect NFW to 94,000. We'll send you a gift as well. And before I get into the message today, I just want to reiterate something that Anthony just talked about in the announcements there a minute ago. If you've got students in middle school or high school, I want to encourage you to get them to camp this summer. Camp is a life-changing experience. I had the opportunity last summer to go with our high school students to New Mexico for camp, and it was powerful. We saw God move and work in some incredible ways, and so we hope that you'll get your students signed up for camp. I'm excited because my kids, both Blake and McKenna, they're both going to be in high school next year, so they get to go to camp together. And my wife Amanda and I, we love camp so much that we are going to camp with the high school ministry again because it's just so much fun. And we got to see God move and work in some powerful ways. And so if you've got students in middle school or high school, there's nothing better that you can sign them up for this summer than summer camp. And if you've got kids who are in elementary school, well, hang on, because we're going to be announcing summer camps for your kids as well. And we're going to be doing those right here in the North Fort Worth campus with WindShape this summer. And I'm excited for that as well. So be watching for that. And we want our kids to grow closer to God this summer, and one of the best ways to do that is through camp. So I hope that you'll get your kids signed up for that this summer. Well, you know, in our house, we now have 3 drivers because 7 months ago, our son Blake turned 16, and he got his driver's license on his birthday. He wanted to drive on his birthday, and so he studied up, did all the tests, he practiced on the road with me, and then on his birthday, we went to the DMV, and he got his driver's license. And you know what? It's pretty awesome to have another driver in the house, right? Because now, my son who plays basketball and travel basketball, he can take himself to practices, and I don't have to sit in the car for 2.5 hours waiting for him to get done with practice. It also means that we have a built-in Uber driver in our house that we don't have to pay for, right? Which is really amazing. And whenever we need something from the store, we can just send him to the store now. We don't have to go out anymore. So it's great. I love having our son as another driver. But being a driver, that also means that he's going out and doing other things besides just the things we ask him to do. He's going out with friends, or he's going out with his girlfriend on the weekend and doing stuff. And as parents, you can judge my wife Amanda and I for this if you want, but as parents, we've decided not to give Blake a curfew. Now, there's a reason behind this. You see, what happens, I believe, when you give a teenage driver a curfew is they turn into an overly aggressive teenage driver, especially on the weekends. Now, this isn't as much of a problem during the week because he's got basketball practice every morning at like 6 a.m. So he's home at night and he's going to bed early because he knows that if he's not awake at practice, the coach is going to make him run more. And so that's not a problem during the week. But on the weekends, that's when he's going out with his friends. That's when he's going out with his girlfriend. And so usually what happens, because this is what happened to me when I was a teenager, is you start suffering from what's called the 5-minute syndrome. Now, you know what that is, right? It's like if you have to be home at 10:30 because that's what curfew is, then you start looking about 10 o'clock at what time it is, and you're like, oh, I can stay for 5 more minutes. And that 5 minutes then turns into what? 5 more minutes. And 5 more minutes turns into 5 more minutes. And then before you know it, you're down to 3 more minutes left until you get it home. And there's no way you're getting home in 3 minutes unless you drive it like you stole it, Ricky Bobby, right? And so rather than giving him a curfew, we instead tell him what time he needs to leave for home. And parents, if you've got students or high schoolers that are driving and you don't have this app called Life 360, you're missing out, right? Because this app, it tells you if they've left at the time you told them to leave, and you can even tell how fast they're driving. So you can text them, which hopefully they don't respond to the text, and you can tell them to slow down, right? But hopefully you can see what's going on in their life. And look, we've all experienced something much like this curfew dynamic, even as an adult, haven't we? You know, that thing where your margin for error gets eaten up because of this decision that you made. Maybe for someone in the room or at home, it's the decision for one more drink. And that one drink leads to another drink. Or it's the looking at the sleeve of Oreos in the cupboard and you're like, I could just eat one more Oreo, especially the double stuff, right? And then it turns into, one more turned into another, and before you know it, you've just finished off the whole sleeve. Or maybe it's, I don't know whose problem this might be, but it's just one more pair of Air Jordans, or in my case, it's like 20 more pairs of Air Jordans, or it's that Louis Vuitton purse, or it's this one more swipe of the credit card. And those are just a few of the things that I could name, but whatever it might be for you, the outcome is usually the same, because here's the problem with this one more thinking. The math doesn't add up. Actually, it begins to fall apart because one more rarely adds anything. Actually, what happens is it usually tends to subtract. Think about it this way. Now most of you in this room, you're not teenage drivers, but you're an adult driver, right? And what I've come to find out is that there are a lot of drivers in this room who probably have gotten this thing called a speeding ticket before, right? Now, this has never happened to me because I always follow the rules. I'm a pastor. Like, I wouldn't want to get pulled over and you see me on the side of the road. So I always follow the speed limit. But what I've heard is there are some people, and maybe this is you in the room, you tend to push the speed limit. Like if it's 75, you go 76 or 77 or 78, or you go 80 or 81, or you see how fast you can go without getting caught. And again, like I've never done this before because I always follow the rules, right? But I've heard there are people who actually try to break the law and see if they can break the law without actually getting caught. And that has never been me, right? I'm just kidding, right? And here's the point. Whether it's driving over the speed limit or curfew or a diet or drinking or whatever it might be, our natural inclination is what? Is to live as close to that line as possible. And that line is the line between. It's the line between legal or illegal, responsible or irresponsible, moral or immoral. And you get the point, right? And this is human nature, because human nature says this: let's get as close to the line as possible without going over and without getting into any trouble. And this is the reason that we tend to live on this line, is because of this assumption that we give. Actually, there's 4 contrasting ideas I want to give you to help illustrate this. It's this: if it's not wrong, well, then it's all right. If it's not illegal, then it's permissible. If it's not immoral, then it's acceptable. And if it's not over the line, it's fine. And if you're like, I don't actually see the problem in that, Pastor Nate, well, let me have you put on your older sibling or your parent hat for a moment. And look, I don't know where everyone is in the room. I don't know your story, but here's what I can bet. I can bet that none of you would ever set out to set the bar low for your children or your younger siblings, would you? I mean, you don't set the bar low for anybody that you care about, because, listen, to embrace assumptions is to organize yourself around this lowest common denominator, or to organize somebody else's life around this lowest common denominator. Because when we do this, what we're asking is this: how low can I go? Or how close to bad can I get without actually being bad? Or how close to wrong can I get without actually doing something wrong? Or if you're a religious person, how close to sin can I get without actually sinning? But it goes further than this. Before long, we're asking, how far over the line can I get without getting caught or experiencing the consequences? Or how long can I neglect my family or my health or my finances without feeling the effects? Or how long can I stay in this addictive behavior without it actually becoming an addiction? And it's a slippery and it's a dangerous slope that begins by asking the wrong question. And that question is this: is there anything wrong with this? And that question usually tends to lead to another question, that is this: how did I get myself into this? So my hope today is that these wouldn't be questions that we ask ourselves, but instead that I'd give you some better questions that you can ask yourself that will keep you away from pushing the limit of where you don't want to head in life, and between what's legal and what's illegal, what's moral and what's immoral, what's right and what's wrong. And really, that's what this series is all about. It's about asking good questions that lead to good decisions and then we live with less regret. And so let's recap where we've been over the last few weeks. Maybe you're new. We've been talking about some questions that we need to ask ourselves. And one of the questions that we started out with is this question that we call the integrity question. And the question that we said that we've got to look in the mirror and we've got to ask ourselves every single day is this: am I being honest with myself really? Because as we've said, the easiest person to deceive is the person that we look at in the mirror every single day. It's the easiest person that we can to convince that maybe what we're doing is okay. And so if we want to make better decisions, it starts by asking this integrity question. Am I being honest with myself really? And then last week we talked about another question. We call it the legacy question. And we said that whenever we're making a decision, we also need to ask this question: what story do I want to tell? You've got a decision to make, whether it's relational or financial or professional, whatever it might be. The question we ask ourselves is, what story do I want to tell? Because here's the good news, right? We said last week that you and I, we get to write the story of our lives one decision at a time. So it's up to us. That's great news because we can decide the path that we want to go. And listen, if you missed those messages, I really want to encourage you, go back and watch those at compass.church/NFW, because these questions, they kind of help us make better decisions and live with fewer regrets. Now, there's another question that we want to look at today that we are calling the maturity question. And the reason that we're calling it a maturity question is because it takes maturity to ask these questions, to answer them honestly, and to act on this question. Because when we refuse to do that, when we refuse to ask these questions, what happens? Well, it takes us back to what Solomon says in Proverbs 27:12, which has kind of been the key verse through this series. If you've been here, I hope that you memorized this verse already. If you're new, what I want us to all do right now is I just want us to read this verse out loud. Proverbs 27:12, Solomon says these words: the prudent person foresees danger and takes precautions. Well, the simpleton goes blindly on and what? Suffers the consequences. So asking and answering and acting on these questions that we're giving is the prudent thing to do. It's the wise, it's the smart thing to do. Not doing this, though, it will possibly result in unwanted consequences. That there will probably be a penalty. And what the mature person does is they ask, they answer, and they act on the answers that they receive from themselves. And so here's the next question that we need to make a part of our decision-making grid. This is the maturity question, and that question that we're going to dig into today is this: what is the wise thing for me to do? Now, here's the thing. Your options that you're considering, they might be legal, they might be acceptable, they may not even be exactly immoral, but the question is this: is it the wise thing to do? And here's what mature people understand. A decision can be both not wrong and unwise at the same time. Now, let me explain why I say this. And actually, I hate to bring this up, but I want you to think about your greatest regret in life. I want you to think about that one thing in life that you wish that you could go back and you could change, that you just wish that you would have done something differently if you were able to go back on. Whatever that moment was or is, isn't it true that your greatest regret was preceded by a series of unwise decisions? And they probably weren't even wrong or illegal or even immoral, but looking back, they were just unwise. And it's the unwise decisions that paved the way to that moment in time that you've maybe regretted ever since. Now, if you're a sports fan, if you watched ESPN over the last few weeks, you maybe saw this story. There's a guy for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers by the name of Antonio Brown. You saw this story, right? Like, Antonio Brown, in the middle of the game, he gets so upset that he just starts taking his jersey off and quitting in the middle of the game. Like, he's just so mad at what's going on. And as you watch this and then you read the story later, the decision that he made may not have been a wrong one, but it was possibly pretty unwise. In fact, this is why I say that. Look at these stats that were on Twitter. If Antonio Brown had just finished out the season, he probably would have got the 8 more catches, 55 receiving yards, and 1 touchdown. He missed out on basically $1 million in salary because he decided to quit in this one game. Now, I know that Antonio Brown's probably not watching this right now, but if you are, Antonio, listen. I know you might be sitting at home reflecting and thinking you wish you could take it back that moment, right? That's what we all wish we could do, but we can't. The fact is we can't go back in time because there is no such thing as a DeLorean retrofitted with a flux capacitor, although I wish sometimes there was. that we can't go back in time and change things, but I will say this. What if we could avoid those decisions in the future by asking this question ahead of time? And that question is, what's the wise thing to do? Now, if you've got a Bible or if you've got a Bible app on your smartphone, go ahead and turn with me into the book of Ephesians. Ephesians chapter 5 is where we're gonna be at today. And the guy who's writing this is this guy named Paul. Now, Paul is a guy who, honestly, if he looked back at his own life, there were probably some things in his life that he regretted, things that he wished that he could change. And Paul knew that he couldn't, but Paul wanted to help these early Christians living in Ephesus not make some of the same decisions that he made. And so he sets out to write this letter to them, and he gets at the heart of the tension that you and I, we all live with every day. In Ephesians chapter 5, look at verses 15 and 16. He says this, "So be careful how you live. Don't live like fools, but like those who are wise. Make the most of every opportunity in these evil days." Now, I want to break this down for a minute here. Apparently, while a lot has improved since the first century, apparently human nature has not, right? It doesn't matter the time period someone is from, we are all equally prone to live carelessly, selfishly, and even unwisely. To live on the edge of disaster, or even worse, to just cross the line altogether. And so Paul comes along here in Ephesians and he says, stop this, stop being careless. He says, you need to be careful. And this is the lens that he's saying you need to look through every decision that you make in life. You need to value every decision through this lens. And then he goes on to say this, oh, and by the way, I want you to make sure that you are making the most of every opportunity. Now, translated from the Greek, what he's saying there is this: I want you to redeem or ransom every opportunity. And I want you to think about this. Don't you wish that you could go back in time and redeem or reclaim those unwise decisions that you've made, those bad choices that you've made in life? Now, we can't, right? I know that if I could, I would, but we can't. But what if, going forward, we could make better decisions that led to less regret? And it was simply by asking this question: what's the wise thing to do? And so this is what Paul is inviting us to. And I don't want you to miss this invitation here. But did you catch what he says? He says, I'm inviting you to invest your time wisely from this moment forward. We've been invited to make the most of every opportunity to redeem or leverage our most valuable asset, which is our time. And we can invest our time in such a way that it moves us forward. Then Paul he tacks on this weird ending. Verse 16, I want to read it again. He says this: make the most of every opportunity in these evil days. So he says, make the most of every opportunity. Oh, and by the way, we're living in these evil days. What's he talking about here? Why does he have to tack that on? Well, you know this, right? But we don't live in a morally or ethically neutral culture anymore, do we? Let's face it, I don't think any of us lately, we've read an ad or we've heard an ad or we've seen an ad where it's trying to convince us to be careful or wise or self-controlled, right? And you definitely haven't walked into that furniture store and the salesman was like, you know what? You go ahead, take your time. You go home and take a few days, and then you come back and you decide what you want. Lo, what do they say? And even the sales associate in your head is like, let's make a deal right now. And Paul's point here in Ephesians, when he talks about evil days, is warning that we're not going to get much help from culture. Because the gravitational pull of culture is, I need this now, not later. It's more, not less. And this is why this question that we're asking is called the maturity question, because it takes maturity to ask it. Now, to go a little deeper, let me just add to this question, and I want to speak from three perspectives today. This is where we're going to land with the rest of our time. Here's the super mature question that I think we need to ask ourselves, and that is this: in light of my past experience, my current circumstance, and my future hopes and dreams, what's the wise thing for me to do? So what I think we need to do is we need to begin to ask this question from a past perspective, a present perspective, and we also need to ask it from a future perspective. And I want you to think about this for a minute. If you think about your past mistakes, right? if you really think about it, they can actually help in your maturity. Now, we don't normally see it that way, do we? We just live in the moment, and we live with burden and of regret and guilt. But I want to encourage you to hop into a different mindset for the rest of 2022. Because the reality is this: those who don't pay attention to what got them into trouble yesterday are liable to wind up in the same trouble tomorrow. In fact, it reminds me of these words that Solomon wrote. Proverbs chapter 26, verse 11, it says this: as a dog returns to his vomit, so a fool repeats his foolishness. Basically, when we fail to pay attention to what got us in that bad place in the first place, we end up right back where we were, just like a dog who is returning to his vomit and eating it, which honestly is just a pretty disgusting image, right? Actually, I was reading this and I was like, I'm gonna share this verse. But then my brain goes like this: God, why did you create dogs to like eating their own vomit, right? Like, what is the point of that? And that's a question I'm gonna ask God when I get to heaven, because it just doesn't make sense to me. All right, I'm diverging from this whole message right now. But that's just something I think about. But what I think the point is this, is when we choose to go back to the same decision that we know we shouldn't make, it's kind of like a disgusting thing, like a dog returning to its own vomit. And so here's what I want to challenge you to do when faced with a decision. I want you to ask first, in light of my past experience, what's the wise thing for me to do? When it comes to finances or academics or professionally, whatever it might be, that maybe you've set yourself up to fail because of your past. What's the wise thing to do? Not the thing that everybody else is doing or what culture tells you to do. What's the wise thing to do? And then we also need to ask, from this present perspective, in light of my current state of mind or circumstances, what's the wise thing to do? And I don't know what your current circumstances are. Maybe it's that you just got out of a relationship. Would it be wrong to jump right back into another relationship? And the answer is no, but in light of your recent circumstances and emotions, is it the wise thing to do? Because I think we all know this, right? But sometimes I think we need to be reminded our greatest regrets relationally are almost always preceded by a series of unwise decisions. But whether that's jumping back into a relationship after a divorce or a bad breakup, that can be a gateway decision that leads to regret. And then there's the third perspective where I want to spend the rest of our time today, and that is this: in light of my future hopes and dreams, what's the wise thing to do? You know, one of the hardest things I think for any of us to see is when someone we care about, someone that we love, make a decision that wrecks their life, or that's a relational like hardship that they're going through that undermines those relationships. Or when, if you've got teenagers, when a teenager makes a decision that heads down a path that they're gonna regret for maybe years or decades to come. Or when you see parents who are parenting in such a way that it drives a wedge in between the relationship between them and their kids. Like, none of us like to witness those things in others. But as I was thinking about this, why is it okay with that being a blind spot in our own lives? And maybe actually that's not fair to say it that way. Maybe it's better to say it this way. Why is it that sometimes we decide not to make a wise decision? Now, the chances I would say are pretty good that you have an idea of what you'd like your future to look like, right? If you're not married and you're just dating, you've got a preferred future that you're hoping for. If you're not dating, but you hope to be dating, you've got a vision of a preferred future. If you're married and you don't have kids, you've got a vision of a preferred future with kids. Or if you're about to retire, you want to be retired, you've got a vision of a preferred future. Whatever it might be, I'm sure we could all say that we've got this vision of what we hope our future it looks like. Now, the challenge is when it comes to dreams, do you realize like the deck is stacked against us? Because life is hard on dreams. And I don't know if you've ever felt this, but it always feels like there's this headwind that is pushing against the things that we hope for in life. And if we aren't careful, we can contribute to the demise of what we hope for in the future. Now, here's the thing. I don't want anyone in this room or at home to rob yourself of your own future. And I don't think you do either. I don't think anybody wakes up in the morning and goes, you know what? Today is the day I'm going to destroy my life once and for all. Like, I just don't think that's a decision that we think about or that we even choose to make. Here's the problem though. We just don't plan not to. But if you ask this question and you act on it, it will keep you from heading where you don't want to go. So we ask, in light of my future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing to do? And what happens is if you ask that question, it brings clarity. And asking this question isn't going to stop you from doing something, but asking this question will stop you from doing something unwise. Because the reality is this: unwise is the gateway to regret. It paves the way to the tipping point, which is oftentimes the tipping point to the point of no return. So instead of allowing unwise to be what determines the direction of your life, let me ask you to ask this instead. Let me actually challenge you with this instead. Would you be willing to put away your old, worn-out excuses once and for all? Because your excuses, they never served you well anyway, right? I mean, if you think about excuses, what are excuses? Excuses escort us to the threshold of regret, and once we get there, they abandon you there with no margin for error. Have you been there before? I know that I have in my own life. And to be honest with you, I don't ever want to go there again. So let's decide that rather than excusing our way forward, let's dream our way forward. Ask, in light of my future hopes and dreams, what's the wise thing for me to do? And as you ask that question, then here's what I want you to do. I want you to decide and write it down. So if you're dating, I want you to think about it this way. In light of my future hopes and dreams, when it comes to relationships, maybe romantically, what's the wise thing for me to do? And is there anything that is maybe getting in the way of that right now that I need to change? What is it that maybe has the potential to rob you of that preferred future relationally? If you're married and you're planning to go the distance, maybe you're hoping that one day you'll have grandkids running around your house and that you'll just live out your life together with the person that you married. Well, what's the wise thing to do? Or is there anything that's maybe getting in the way of what you hope for in the future? Is there someone or something that is that block to what you hope for? Or if you've got children, what do you envision for your children in the future? What do you envision for it to look like relationally with your children in the future? And so if that's the case, then what's the wise thing to do? What is that preferred future? What does it look like? So what is the thing you need to do to protect that dream right now? And here's the thing, you know this. I mean, everybody ends up somewhere in life, right? I want you to decide to live to end up somewhere on purpose. And wisdom paves the way for that. Solomon wrote these words, Proverbs chapter 9, verses 11 and 12. He said this: wisdom will multiply your days and add years to your life. If you become wise, you will be the one to benefit. If you scorn wisdom, you will be the one to suffer. Look, I think we'd all agree that we would rather benefit than suffer. Like, nobody sets out to go, you know what, I just want to suffer the rest of my life. We say, I want to benefit, right? Like, we don't want to suffer. That's not where we want to end up. So we've got to ask the question, what's the wise thing for me to do? And so one last time, let me just put this out there. In light of your past experience, your current circumstances, and your future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing to do? Now, you remember the story I told you up front of my son and no curfew and the 5-minute syndrome? Well, here's what I want to leave you with today. Don't let this time here be like that 5-minute syndrome. Like where you're like, ooh, that was good. Pastor Nate, he brought it today. And you tweet something out and you're like, listen to what my pastor said, but then you get the 5-minute syndrome, right? And you forget everything that we talked about today after you leave this place, and you just move on from it. What I hope happens today is that this message longer than 5 minutes, that it sinks deep into your heart, because you owe it to yourself. And I think you owe it to the people depending on you to ask and answer, what's the wise thing for me to do? You know, next week we're closing out this series with one more question that is really important, and you don't want to miss it. And so next week, if you are maybe struggling to get out of bed on Sunday morning, or you're thinking, should I go to Compass North Fort Worth or not? Just ask yourself this question: what's the wise thing for me to do? And then you answer it and go, get to Compass North Fort Worth, and I promise it'll be worth it, right? But I hope this series has been super helpful for you, that you're asking these questions, you're making better decisions, and you're living with fewer regrets, because that's what we all want, right? And so I hope this week you'll ask yourself, as you're dealing with decisions, just to ask yourself, what is the wise thing for me to do when it comes to this? If you do, I believe it'll change things for you. I want to pray for you as we close out today. Father, I just, I thank you for your word. I thank you for just the challenge of what Paul says, and even what Solomon gives us about the need for wisdom in our lives. God, I pray this week, as those in the room or those at home, that they face decisions, that they would just ask that question: what's the wise thing for me to do in light of my past experience, my current circumstances, my future hopes and dreams? What is the wise thing for me to do? And God, I believe if that is what we base our decisions on, we will make better decisions. We'll live with a whole lot less regret. But God, I thank you for your word. I hope that we just apply it to our lives today. We leave this place and it becomes kind of the center of what we do this week. We pray this in your name. Amen.